All right, buongiorno, good morning. How you doing? This is Big Rich coming out the rainy streets of Queens, New York, with another Wake and Bake Mob Stories episode, video, however you call it. Salute to everybody that's rocking with us for the 12 nights of Ruckus. Night 5 is tonight. Now, before I hit these streets and conduct some business, we need to take care of a little business of our own, right? So, especially today, because it's raining, gentlemen, wipe your feet on the rug before entering the room. Throw some smoke in the atmosphere. Allow me to, partake, and then you guys follow as so. Delicious, delicious. What do I got today? A little bit of mango haze with a little bit of live resin. It tastes just like mangoes. It's incredible. All right. Anyway, wipe your feet on the rug. You already know how we get down. Time to conduct some business. Mob Story Season 2. Let's get right into it. This article is written by Nicole Hong from the New York Times. Great article. Salute to my good friend Dan Supreme. This is my best friend, my brother. I grew up with him. He put me onto the article. I was like, holy shit, I missed it. You know what I'm saying? The gossiping, power-hungry Gambino crime family. A rare look inside. A case against reputed Mafia members revealed their conversations when their boss was killed. On a quiet night in March, a mob leader was executed in New York City for the first time since 1985. And for those that know, yesterday was the anniversary of the Paul Castellano hit in New York City. All right? Salute to Shattered for making me aware of that. The body of Francisco Cali, a reputed boss of the Gambino crime family, lay crumpled outside his Staten Island home, pierced by at least 6 bullets. Hours later, 2 soldiers in the Gambino family talked on the phone. One of them, Vincent Fiore, said he had just read a short article about the news, according to prosecutors. No tears were shed for their fallen leader. Their murder was a good thing, Mr. Fiore, 57, said on the call. The vacuum at the top meant that Andrew Campos, described by the authorities as the Gambino captain who ran Mr. Fiore's crew, was poised to gain more power. Mr. Cali's death was just the beginning of surprises to come for the Gambino family. Last week, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn charged Mr. Fiore and 11 others in a sprawling racketeering scheme linked to the Gambinos, once the country's preeminent organized crime dynasty. The charges stemmed from a years-long investigation involving wiretapped calls, physical surveillance, and even listening devices installed inside an office where mob associates worked. Interesting, did you notice they said no informants, no CIs on this case, involving wiretaps, physical surveillance, and listening devices. That doesn't mean that they don't have something up their sleeve. You know how these feds get down. There could be a little desgraciado in the shadows just waiting to pop its head. As part of the case, the government released a court filing that offered an extremely rare glimpse at the reaction inside a mafia family to the murder. A curious mix of mourning and jockeying for power. The case showed that the life in the mob can be just as petty as life in a corporate cubicle. Well, I don't know why she would use the word petty. I mean, business is business. At the end of the day, what are we talking about here? This is not poetry class. You know what I mean? Mob guys are the biggest gossips in the world, said James J. Hunt, the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration's office in New York. You think they're tough guys, but they're all looking out for themselves. The only way they get promoted is by a guy dying or going to jail. While Mr. Fiore initially plotted how Mr. Cali's death would help him and his faction, he adopted a different tone when calling his own ex-wife a few days later, prosecutors said. He warmly referred to Mr. Cali as Frankie and seemed to mourn the boss as a man who was loved. He speculated about the killer's motives, saying he had watched a surveillance tape from Mr. Cali's home that captured the murder. Mr. Fiore appeared ambitious, Court documents showed eager to reveal his connections to other gangs and organized crime families. About 2 weeks after Mr. Cali's death, Mr. Fiore bragged in another wiretapped conversation about how he would take revenge on students who hit his son at school, a government filing said. Mr. Fiore talked first about sending his daughter to beat the students up. But he also had other options, he said on the call. His ex wife's father was a Latin king. Her nephews were Bloods, and her cousin was a member of the Chingalings, a South Bronx motorcycle gang. Mr. Fiore and other defendants have each pled not guilty to the charges. A lawyer for Mr. Fiore did not respond to a request for comment. Despite decades of declining influence in New York City, the Gambino family, led by the notoriously flashy John J. Gotti in the 1980s, is still raking in millions of dollars, according to the government. Prosecutors said they have evidence that the family had maintained its long-standing coziness with the construction industry, infiltrating high-end Manhattan properties. The indictments accused Gambino associates of bribing a real estate executive to skim hundreds of thousands of dollars from New York City construction projects, including the XI, a luxury building with two twisting towers being built along the Highline Park in West Chelsea. At the height of their power in the 1980s and early 1990s, the Gambinos and other organized crime families had a strong hold on the New York City construction through their control of construction unions and the concrete business. Some of the defendants charged last week operated a carpentry company called CWC Contracting Corporation, which prosecutors said paybacks to real estate developers in exchange for contracts. Despite the scramble after Mr. Cali's death in March, the Gambino crime family continued to thrive through fraud, bribery, and extortion, investigators said. This is all still alleged. Where's the proof? We don't have no proof of this yet. The wiretaps quoted in court papers hinted at the crime family's capacity for violence. One of the defendants were recorded in April claiming that he had a fight in a diner and stabbed the kid, 1,000 times with a fork. Inside another defendant's home and vehicle, agents found brass knuckles and a large knife that appeared to have blood on it. Among the notable names in last week's takedown were two longtime Gambino members, Andrew Campos and Richard Martino, who was once considered by Mr. Gotti to be rising stars in the Mafia, according to former officials. John was enamored by these guys, said Philip Scala, a retired FBI agent who supervised the squad investigating the Gambino family. He couldn't believe what they were doing. These kids were making millions of dollars as entrepreneurs. That's crazy, millions of dollars. It just... it is, right place, right time, I guess, In particular, Mr. Martino had long been viewed by mob investigators as somewhat of a white-collar crime genius, former officials said. Prosecutors have previously accused him of orchestrating the largest consumer fraud of the 1990s, which netted close to $1 billion. As part of that scheme involved a fake pornography site that lured users with promises of free tour and then charged their credit cards without their knowledge. That's great. Because you got all these perverts and weirdos that'll put up the card just for the free tour, and then you get a dollar here, dollar. All those dollars adds up. Hey, if you're gonna do something, be the best, right? Mr. Campos, 50, and Mr. Martino, 60, each pled guilty in 2005 to their role in the fraud and served time in federal prison. But soon as they were released, the government said they returned to the family business. Mr. Martino, who had been known to wear Prada shoes and drive fancy cars, is now accused of hiding his wealth from the government to avoid paying the full $9.1 million forfeiture from the earlier case. You goddamn right, hide every penny of that shit. I'd be digging holes like Escobar did in Colombia. He just found property and land and just started digging up and stashing money everywhere. Hell yeah. Hey, you gonna take me to jail? You ain't gonna take my money. I don't give a shit. After Mr. Martino's release from prison in 2014, he still controlled companies that conducted millions of dollars in transactions using intermediaries to obscure his involvement, the government alleged. This included investments in pizzerias on Long Island in Westchester County, according to a person familiar with the matter. Mr. Martino's lawyer, Maurice Sicard, said his client fully paid the required forfeiture before reporting to prison. He added, the suggestion that Mr. Martino concealed his ownership of businesses and bank accounts to avoid this obligation ignores or misrepresents his financial circumstances. Mr. Campos, meanwhile, climbed the ranks to become a powerful captain inside the Gambino family, according to prosecutors. Henry E. Mazurek, a lawyer for Mr. Campos, said the government's photos and surveillance footage of his client were not evidence of a crime. The government presents a trumped up case that substitutes old lore for actual evidence, Mr. Mazurek said. Evidence. So I said before, all this is hearsay. Where's the evidence? After searching Mr. Campos's home in Scarsdale, New York, a wealthy suburb north of New York City, investigators found traces of a storied mob legacy. In his closet were photos taken during his visits with Mr. Martino to see Frank Lacascio, Mr. Gotti's former consigliere or counselor in prison. Mr. Lacascio is serving a life sentence. He was convicted in 1992 alongside Mr. Gotti by the same United States Attorney's Office that brought last week's indictment. Mr. Gotti, who died in prison in 2002, was found guilty of, among other things, ordering the killing of Paul Castellano in 1985. Again, the anniversary was yesterday, the last time a Gambino boss was gunned down in the streets. On March 14th, the day of Mr. Cali's death, Mr. Campos drove into Manhattan around 5:50 p.m. to discuss the circumstances of the murder with the Gambino family members, seemingly unaware that law enforcement was tracking his every move. He parked near a pizzeria up on the Upper East Side, according to a person familiar with the matter. As the night progressed, he met with Gambino family captains on the Upper East Side and near a church in Brooklyn. They stood in the street chatting openly, but law enforcement officials could not hear the conversations. Like, you stand in the street, you smoke a cigarette, you cover your mouth, you know what I'm saying? Several days later, Mr. Campos and Mr. Fiore drove to Staten Island for a secret meeting. A group about 8 high-level Gambino lieutenants gathered to discuss Mr. Cali's murder, a court filing said. In a wiretap call the next day, Mr. Fiore complained that he had stayed out past midnight. Mr. Fiore said on the call that a woman had been at Mr. Cali's home the night of his death, pointing to her as a possible connection. Court papers do not reveal this woman's identity. Nobody within the mob family seemed to suspect a person who was ultimately charged with Mr. Cali's murder. A 25-year-old who lived with his parents on Staten Island, who believed in far-right conspiracy theories and appeared to have no clear motive. All right? Again, crazy story. Now listen, I can't stress this enough. You need to like the video. You need to share the video. You need to comment on the video because it helps us. If you are down with Team Ruckus, if you're down with Team Ruckus, I need you to like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, especially for all my smokers. You already know. I need to know what you're dibble dabbling in. And of course, leave comments on the article. Come on, Link. Of course, I want you to talk about the article. All right, salute to Team Ruckus. You already know how we get down. You know who does this. You know how we do it. Big Rich, Team Ruckus. Remember, we will be moving the Wake Up Show to a new channel. We're going to promote that correctly. Everybody that, of course, we want everybody to subscribe to the new channel, but especially for those that like to wake up and enjoy the morning show. We got 12 straight night shows to go. I think tonight is night 5. Salute to Team Ruckus. Salute to everybody. You know who this is. It's your boy Big Rich, about to hit these streets and make some guap. You know what I'm saying? You know what they say, throw the relish in the back pocket and light up the broccoli, kid. Salute.